The first moment I realized something was wrong came with the rumble of buses rolling down the gravel road toward my family's mountain cabin. Dust clouds rose in the evening air, wheels grinding the stones my grandfather had once laid with his bare hands. And when the doors hissed open, people poured out by the dozens. They were dressed in evening wear, clutching gift bags, chatting loudly as if they were arriving at a resort. My stomach dropped. At the front of the procession, commanding like a general, stood Karen, the HOA president who had spent months telling me my cabin didn't fit the aesthetic of the community. She wore a shimmering purple dress that strained against her wide frame, her chin held high with entitlement, her voice carrying like a trumpet through the valley. "Welcome, everyone. The venue is prepared just as I promised." She gestured toward my locked gate as if it were her personal ballroom door. I stormed out from the porch, my son right behind me, and shouted over the noise. "What the hell is going on here, Karen?" My voice cracked with both anger and disbelief. She turned, her smirk widening as though this entire ambush were a perfectly normal arrangement. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she crooned, waving her manicured hand. "The HOA decided your cabin would host our summer gala. I reserved it in your absence." My fists clenched. "You reserved nothing. This cabin is private property, mine, my family's, no one else's." The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through them as they realized the so-called reservation might not be legitimate. But Karen, never one to yield, raised her chin higher. "I put down your name on the official event form. That means it's binding. 200 guests are expecting an evening of fine dining and entertainment, and you wouldn't dare embarrass yourself for maybe turning them away." The sheer audacity of her words stole my breath. My cabin wasn't just a house in the woods, it was sacred ground, built by my grandfather after he returned from war, a place where generations of my family found peace. And now she wanted to trample it under high heels and cocktail chatter for her self-aggrandizing show. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself calm. My son tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, you locked the gate tight this morning, right?" That's when it hit meth chain, the padlock, the heavy steel gate I'd secured after months of Karen's attempts to snoop. Relief surged through me. If she thought she could waltz in with her crowd, she was in for a rude awakening. I raised my hand and pointed squarely at the iron barrier. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you were misled, but this property is not and has never been available for HOA events. And as you can see, the gate is locked." The murmurs swelled into gasps. Guests glanced at each other in confusion, some already pulling out their phones, muttering about calling their drivers back. Karen's face flushed, her smug mask cracking. "He's joking. The key is just inside. He's stalling to make a scene." She stomped toward the gate, tugging at the chain until her arms quivered, but the lock didn't budge. The metallic clangs echoed in the mountain air, sounding less like authority and more like desperation. Phones went up, flashes lit the dusk, and suddenly the HOA queen looked less like a leader and more like a thief caught red-handed. Then came the twist nobody expected. A white SUV pulled up, and out stepped Councilman Harris, a local official I had quietly invited weeks earlier after Karen's last round of threats. He had grown tired of HOA presidents abusing power, and when I tipped him off about Karen's scheme, he agreed to witness whatever stunt she might pull. Now, as he approached the gate with his clipboard, the crowd parted in stunned silence. "What's going on here?" he asked firmly, eyeing Karen's trembling hands still clutching the padlock. Karen faltered, her voice suddenly shrill. "Councilman, you're just in time. This man is refusing to honor the reservation for the HOA gala." Harris cut her off. "Reservation? Whose signature authorized this?" Her face contorted, eyes darting, and finally she snapped. "As president, I signed it myself." Harris raised his brow. "On property that isn't HOA owned, without consent of the owner." The silence was suffocating. Dozens of eyes bore into her, recording every word. And then Harris delivered the blow. "That's fraud, Miss Karen. Plain and simple." Karen tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, breaking under the weight of the truth. "It's community tradition. Everyone expects it here." Harris didn't budge. "The only thing I see is trespassing, misrepresentation, and abuse of authority." He turned to the crowd. "You've all been deceived. This land belongs solely to him. Not the HOA, not Karen." The murmurs erupted again. But this time they weren't whispers, they were accusations hurled at Karen herself. Guests who had trusted her to plan their evening now realized they had been pawns in her power game. Karen's mask finally shattered. She screamed at me, spittle flying, her body shaking with rage. "You ruined everything. You made me look like a fool." I stepped closer, calm and steady. "No, Karen. You did that all by yourself." And with that, I turned the key in the lockbox, not to open the gate, but to tighten the chain one last click for emphasis. The crowd gasped again, cameras flashing as Karen collapsed against the bars, defeated. Karen's body sagged against the bars as if the steel itself had turned traitor, betraying her grand performance. The crowd, once her eager audience, began to shift uneasily, mutters rising like a storm tide. A woman in a sequin dress whispered sharply, "She promised us catering, music, everything." Another guest clutched her husband's arm and snapped, "This is embarrassing. We paid for tickets." That was when the truth sank, and not only had Karen staged this fiasco on stolen ground, but she had sold seats to it. My chest tightened with both fury and awe at the depth of her deceit. Councilman Harris raised his voice over the din, his words cutting clean through the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you were charged money for this so-called event, I strongly advise you to contact the County Fraud Division immediately. This was never a sanctioned venue. You have been misled." His tone was clipped, professional, final. Karen flinched at every syllable like they were lashes, her plump face glistening with sweat under the fading sun. But she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. She turned her fury back on me, jabbing her finger through the bars like a dagger. "You set me up. You knew I was planning this, and you invited him." She spat the word, glancing at Harris, "just to humiliate me." My voice was steady, but my heart thundered. "No, Karen. You humiliated yourself. You lied, you forged, and you tried to take what was never yours. My grandfather built this cabin after serving his country, and you thought you could erase that with a pen stroke? Not today." That was when the twist arrived from the most unexpected blasphemy teenage daughter, Emily. She had been filming the whole time on her phone, her face pale but determined. She stepped forward, her voice trembling yet loud enough for all to hear. "Mrs. Karen tried to bribe me last week. She said if I gave her dad's spare key, she'd give me $100 and let me use the HOA pool for free all summer." The gasp from the crowd was like a thunderclap. Even Harris froze, eyes widening. Emily held up her phone, playing back a recording of the encounter. Karen's voice was unmistakable, sharp, commanding, dripping with entitlement. "Don't tell your father. Just give me the key. No one has to know." The crowd erupted, shouts of outrage crashing against Karen like waves against rock. A man in a tuxedo bellowed, "You tried to involve a kid in this scam?" Another voice shouted, "She's been pocketing money for years." Phones were up everywhere now, streaming live, broadcasting her downfall across every corner of the neighborhood and beyond. Karen's empire of intimidation was dissolving before her eyes, and she couldn't stop it. Police cruisers appeared at the bend in the gravel road, their red and blue lights slicing the twilight. The guests parted instantly, a sea of sequins and tuxedos giving way to the officers striding forward. Harris waved them over, gesturing at Karen with a grim face. "You'll want to hear the full scope of this. Forgery, fraud, attempted bribery of a minor, and trespassing at minimum." Karen thrashed against the gate, her voice breaking into a shriek that cut through the mountain air. "I am the HOA president. You can't do this to me. You need me." But the words no longer held power. They were the desperate cries of a tyrant watching her throne turn to ash. When the officers clicked the cuffs around her wrists, the crowd didn't cheer, they sighed. A long, exhausted sigh of relief, like shackles had been lifted from an entire community. The next week, the story spread like wildfire. Local news ran headlines. HOA president arrested after fraudulent gala scheme. Clips of her meltdown went viral, shared with mocking captions, dissected on talk shows, replayed on neighborhood forums with gleeful commentary. My daughter's recording became the nail in her coffin, undeniable proof of her corruption. But the deeper the investigators dug, the darker it became. They uncovered thousands of dollars siphoned from HOA accounts, funneled into her personal shopping sprees and vacations. They discovered forged documents pressuring homeowners to pay special assessments that never reached the community ledger. And the ticket sales for the so-called gala? Nearly $20,000 collected in cash, now evidence in a fraud case. The confrontation in court was nothing short of cinematic. Karen shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her once pristine hair a disheveled mess, her arrogant eyes hollowed out. She tried to plead for leniency, whining about stress, about her unappreciated service to the community. But when the prosecutor played Emily's recording aloud in that solemn chamber, her fate was sealed. The jury's faces hardened, the judge's gavel cracked, and Karen was sentenced to multiple years behind bars. The queen of fines and citations had finally been cited herself, by the law she thought she was above. The aftermath was something I never imagined I'd live to see. Without Karen's iron grip, the HOA crumbled and was replaced by a voluntary neighborhood committee, transparent, cooperative, and focused on actual improvements rather than power plays. The cabin, once a target of her obsession, became a symbol of resistance. We hosted community picnics there, kids running free where once Karen wanted them silenced. Emily and my son stood taller, proud that their courage had helped spark real change. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the new committee hung lanterns for a summer gathering, Harris leaned toward me and said quietly, "You know, this neighborhood owes you. If you hadn't stood firm, if your daughter hadn't spoken up, Karen might still be running this place into the ground." I shook my head, glancing at my kids laughing by the fire. "No, Councilman. It wasn't me. It was all of us. We just needed someone to shut the gate." Karen's downfall wasn't just her humiliation, it was our liberation. She crawled so deep into her delusions that she thought she owned everything and everyone. But in the end, her lies became the bars of her own cage. Now, the mountain air feels lighter. The gravel road no longer rumbles with Karen's entitlement, but with neighbors arriving to share meals, music, and laughter. My cabin stands as it always has, a place of peace, a reminder that home is sacred, and a testament that no Bellino, matter how loud, no matter how powerful, can take that away. And here's where I leave you with the question that still lingers. Was shutting the gate the only way to bring Karen down, or could there have been another path to justice? Share your thoughts, because stories like this remind us that every community must decide where it draws the line between right and wrong.